the major strategies in the Infernoid deck is milling cards to the graveyard, so that you can summon back Infernoid monsters. The most commonly played is Reasoning. Your opponent declares a level between, I guess, 1 and 13 would probably cover all levels in Yugioh. If they call the number wrong, well, what you do is you go through every card from the top of your deck down until you run into a monster that can be normal summoned. If they call it wrong, that monster gets special summoned, and all the cards go to the graveyard. If they call the level correctly, then all the cards go to the graveyard, including the monster. This can put anywhere between 1 to 15 cards in the graveyard on any given turn. The more normal summons in the deck you run, the less likely you are to get a good mill. After Reasoning, we play Monster Gate, which does the same thing. You tribute a monster, and then you go through every card in the deck until you run into a monster that can be normal summoned. The only difference is this monster will get summoned because Monster Gate's tribute changes the effect slightly. Other cards that can mill cards include Needlebug Nest, the top 5 cards of your deck randomly, Foolish Burial, any one card you want from your deck, the Lightsworn Engine, Raiden, will mill 2 cards from his effect and 2 at the end phase. He's also a tuner, so he helps. He's a pretty good monster to hit off of Reasoning as well. Lila will mill 3 cards during the end phase and can become some spell and trap removal. Lumina can be hit and mills 3 cards in the end phase. Can also be used to revive another Lightsworn monster, so you can mill additional cards. There's also Raikou, Lightsworn Hunter. Some decks have run him for defense. Additionally, additional milling engines if Reasoning was a problem. There was a time period where people were playing Retaliating Sea, in which case, if you played Reasoning, it might become a Macrocosmos, so that was dangerous. A non-Lightsworn card that was played occasionally, Card Trooper, could mill 3 cards. So Card Trooper and Raiden were played most because they can mill during your turn. Other Lightsworn cards to play, which would mill cards, included Charge of the Light Brigade, and additionally Solar Recharge. This is supposed to be over here. So yeah, Solar Recharge, if you played a very heavy Lightsworn deck, would mill 2 cards and allow you to draw 2 cards and put a Lightsworn monster in the graveyard. Charge of the Light Brigade mills 3 cards and searches for a Lightsworn monster. And the other Lightsworn that was played occasionally is Wolf, Lightsworn Beast, because he would allow you to have extra Lightsworn monsters in the deck for Solar Recharge. Additionally, if he would get milled by Reasoning, he can't be normal summoned, so he would be special summoned by the mill instead. Now, there are other cards that are good to play because they have graveyard effects. Additionally, they are spells and trap cards, so when they do get hit through Reasoning, they wind up in the graveyard, so they still become useful. There's Galaxy Cyclone, which can destroy a face-up spell or trap, which is a very useful effect in Game 1. Less useful in Game 2, because the card you generally need to destroy is Imperial Iron Wall, which says that no cards can be banished, so you can't banish these cards from the graveyard when Imperial Iron Wall is out, so trying to use this for that is a terrible idea. Additional cards that work from the graveyard, we have Breakthrough Skill. During your turn, you can negate the effect of a monster on the field. Effects of a monster on the field. That lets you get by Darklaw, that lets you get by Vanity's Fiend, Majesty's Fiend, any kind of continuous effect that's holding you down. Satellar Knight Diamond, I used to use this on, and then play Reasoning, but with Ptolemaeus banned, it's become less frequent. Then there's Skill Prisoner, which negates a monster effect that targets this card that you choose. You can use this during either player's turn, so it's a pretty good card effect. I've never played this card, but I know people who do. Skill Successor. During your turn, you can banish this card from the graveyard to gain 800 attack points, which doesn't seem like much, but a lot of the big problem monsters currently are slightly too strong for certain monsters to attack. So this is actually a pretty good card, and I actually do play this one. I play 2 of them. I also play 2 breakthrough skills. A card I've been siding lately. This one does not banish from the graveyard to activate. What it does is, if it's in your graveyard and your opponent declares a direct attack, you can special summon this for defense. I play this because it's a trap card, so when you mill it, it goes by in reasoning. It also has the ability to give you 300 attack as a set trap, so it's not totally useless if it doesn't get milled. Also, I play Vanishment, so I can discard any card in my hand to get a void card, so I can put any card in the graveyard. Next we have Electromagnetic Turtle, which is similar for defense, but if you play Reasoning and you get the turtle on the field, that could be bad. The turtle is at the mercy of your opponent if it's on the field. It could be banished there. It could be other things can happen. Additionally, it just gets in the way of the mill, so it's not a card you really want to hit. I mean, if Reasoning gets limited, which is a possibility at some point, we may start playing more normal summons like Raiden and so on. So this would be a decent card to mill by accident using random mills, but Reasoning as a mill, it's not a good card to hit. Other ideas, since the Infernoids are fire fiends, there were some fire cards that were worth mentioning. One is Volcanic Counter. If you take any battle damage while this is in your graveyard, your opponent takes the damage instead, well, in addition. So if your opponent has a Dark Destroyer on the field, and this is in your graveyard, and they attack you for 3,000, they also take 3,000. You banish this from the graveyard. So this card is affected by Imperial Iron Wall, but as soon as Imperial Iron Wall is gone, it will be able to activate. One of the things I used to do with this is I would activate Void Banishment, so I could not summon cards, and then I would play Reasoning. Then your turtle or your counter would stop the Reasoning, because they are monsters that could be normal summoned, but they would go to the graveyard. And then your opponent would forget that they were there because they were never summoned, and they're just unusual cards for an Infernoid player to be playing. And Volcanic Counter only works if you have at least one other fire monster in the graveyard, therefore you can't splash it into every deck, but you can splash it in there. And considering the Infernoid's biggest problem is summoning that third monster to deal damage, this is not a bad one to have. In reference to fire cards, we also have Flamvel Counter, which is a counter trap that can negate a spell or trap card by banishing a fire monster with 200 defense from your graveyard. That could be Decatron. Other fire monsters that I've considered playing would be Red Resonator. Also has 200 defense. I didn't put him on here just because the slide is full, but it's an okay card. You generally won't want to banish your Decatrons, but you can. In reference to those fire monsters with 200 defense, you can also play Rekindling, and everybody does play 1 or 2 or 3 Decatrons, so this is always a live card. Another card I've used is Spiritual Fire Art Kurenai. You contribute 1 fire monster in your field, and your opponent takes damage equal to its attack. It's an additional way of dealing that third monster's worth of damage, and you don't actually have to connect. So if you can attack them with a Tondel and Anoku and deal 5,800, if you just tribute 1 of them, you win the game. It's a pretty good card, but I've been trying to play more cards that are better off the mill. Now, usually, the Infernoid deck will actually side deck an array of Floodgate monsters, since Reasoning is a very random card in terms of what the levels are of the monsters. The more random cards you play, the better. We tend to side occasionally unusual Floodgate monsters. So, Jinzo, a level 6, negates all trap cards. Spell Canceller, level 5, negates all spell cards. End of Anubis, negates all monster effects or spell or trap. No card effect can activate in the graveyard. He's a walking Abyss Dweller at all times. Whereas a Spell Canceller will be good against cards like Monarchs and Pantheism and Monarch Storm 4th. Jinzo will be good against decks that are trap heavy, like Burning Abyss. Fog King. Not that you really want him to come off on reasoning, but if he does, your opponent cannot tribute, so he's a walking Mask of Restrict. Good for the Monarch match. Hopefully you draw him. He actually has an OTK you can use. You can summon 2 big Infernoids, tribute them both for Fog King, and put him at somewhere between 5,000, somewhere in the 5,000 attack range, and then just summon another 3rd Infernoid to go for the OTK. Next, there's Chaos Hunter, which doesn't allow your opponent to banish cards. Hitting him off of reasoning is good. His effect is generally not useful. That says he can be summoned by discarding a card if your opponent special summons, because most monsters they will special summon will actually have more attack than he does, and he'll just die. A mini version of that would be Kaiku. I played a mixture of these two at one point, because Kaiku does not allow your opponent to banish cards from their graveyard. So the goal was that if they were onto this idea that I was playing Chaos Hunter, occasionally I'd have level 4 Kaiku in there to throw off the reasoning. Although being able to banish cards from other places was not working for me. Next we have Red Eyes Black Flare Dragon. This is the more interesting, I think, set of monsters you can play. These are Gemini monsters. Red Eyes Black Flare Dragon, Red Eyes Archfiend of Lightning, and Sindonian Emperor Dragon. Because they're Gemini monsters, when they're summoned by reasoning, they are considered normal monsters, which means you can still special summon 2 big Infernoid monsters, and their attack is all good enough to kill your opponent. The extra additional bonus for these cards is that once you've summoned those 2 Infernoids, you can use your Gemini summon, since you usually don't normal summon in the deck. And all of their effects are really good. Red Eyes Black Flare says it can inflict, it says if damage calculation performed involving this card, you can, at the end of the battle phase, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to this card's original attack. So 2,400 damage for free. So if you can't put out that 3rd monster, if you have Red Eyes Flare and another monster, you can deal an extra 2,400 damage. Also, it can be the 3rd monster with the OTK. Also, if you play Red Eyes Darkness Metal Flare Dragon, the Xyz monster, it's a Red Eyes, so if it's in the graveyard, you can detach a Sight Moss and special summon this from the graveyard, and then you can normal summon it for the Gemini summon. So it was an idea I wanted to play with, but I haven't fiddled with it enough yet. Skull Archfiend of Lightning can destroy all of your opponent's monsters with defense under 2,500 when you Gemini summon it, which could give you an open board for game. It's a pretty good card. Also, it's level 6, so if your opponent does figure out you're playing level 7, you can play level 6, you can play a mix and match. There are a whole bunch of good ideas. Then there's Sindonian Emperor Dragon, which is the first card I thought of playing. It's a level 6 normal, it can attack twice. It doesn't have to send a monster to the graveyard, so it's pretty safe. But I feel like it's a little worse than the other 2. But as it's level 6, if you wind up drawing these cards, you can tribute summon pretty easily, whereas you don't really want to tribute 2 Infernoids to summon the Black Flare Dragon. Other cards that have been good for hitting off of reasoning include Evil Hero Infernal Gainer, who can make your opponent attack, one of your monsters attack twice. He also removes himself from the field, so you can summon Anoku, make him attack. You could summon a Tondel and Anoku, and make this guy make Anoku attack twice. Or if he was on the field from reasoning first, you can summon a Sight Moss, make him attack twice, then banish him from the field, and then summon another one. A monster that's worth playing is Lava Golem. If you like the idea of using kaijus to get rid of monsters from your opponent's side of the field, but don't like the idea of the kaiju being summoned off of reasoning, Lava Golem is better. But if you do like the idea of the kaiju being hit off of reasoning, you should play a kaiju. But you can remove problem monsters this way that can normally not be removed from the field. Now, Infernoids have a lot of floodgates that do not really affect them, and a lot of floodgates that do. So let's talk about the ones that do not affect you. Um, you have Rivalry of the Warlords. It says players can only control one type of monster. Every monster in this deck is a Fire Fiend. So Fiends, most decks run a mixture, so you force them to get rid of all of their extra monsters and be unable to summon others. You can also play Goes in Match, which does the same thing for attributes. All of these monsters are fire, and other things I've noticed is that some of the cards I've suggested playing are also fire, like Lava Golem or Symphonian Emperor Dragon. So you can lock your opponent down by giving them a Lava Golem, and it doesn't hurt you to play Symphonian Emperor. Other floodgates you could play: Soul Drain. None of these monsters activate in the graveyard, even though that you can summon them from the graveyard, because summoning conditions are not effects, so you're not affected by Soul Drain or End of Anubis or um, Abyss Dweller, which is a common misplay that your opponent will make. They will summon Abyss Dweller to prevent you from summoning Infernoids, but that does not stop them at all. Mistake, you don't necessarily search a lot. You play Charge of the Light Brigade sometimes, which is a search, but you can always hold this until this is gone. Your opponent's more likely to need to get rid of Mistake for you than you get rid of it yourself. Anti-Spell Fragrance is a iffy card. You can technically play it because your monsters do a lot of the work, but you do need reasoning to resolve, so it's one of those half and half floodgates you may or may not want to play. I honestly don't play this card. Other ideas. It's pretty clear that the Infernoids banish a lot, so Burial from a Different Dimension is great. It's also an offensive weapon against Cosmo. You can return a banished Cosmo to the graveyard should it be attempted to be picked up by Cosmo Town, which that effect of that Cosmo Town can only be activated once per turn. So unless they want to set another Cosmo Town, they're not going to be able to pick a card up from the banished pile if you put it back in the graveyard. You can also play Miracle Dig, which is only during your turn, but requires you to have 5 or more banished cards. But if you find yourself constantly with too many cards banished, or if you do what I do and just banish a lot all the time, not worried about how many are left in my graveyard, because that's usually where the downfall, I think, of most players who play Infernoids are, is they're not willing to banish things. They're being slightly too conservative. Your monsters are a pain for your opponent to deal with, so if you're willing to summon them, they may have actual trouble dealing with them. If you become too stingy with the banishes, you'll probably lose from leaving yourself open. But this card has its flaw that there's a 5 monster minimum to use it. Other cards, 1-for-1, is often used to summon Decatron from the deck, as Decatron can become a lot of different effects. He's an out to a lot of cards, like Imperial Iron Wall and other floodgates and other monsters that are a problem to deal with. Extra deck monsters, you'll tend to make him into Entra and send them back to the deck. A card I play is Trap Stun. I side this in against decks that are filled with counter traps, because you can negate even counter traps. And then what you do is you summon Deviati and kill all of your opponent's spells and trap cards. And also, Deviati doesn't kill void cards, so you can negate your own void traps and then destroy all of your opponent's cards. And then your cards will become active again next turn. I put down 2 extra deck monsters for now to talk about, and that's just Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, because he mills 3 cards as part of his effect. You can use a Harmodic and a Lumina, or Harmodic and Harmodic, or Harmodic and Decatron as Entra to summon Dante, and use Dante to mill cards. I put Minerva here if you play online only. Minerva mills 4 cards. And that's really it for support. We'll talk about the extra deck in the next video.